So, thank you for joining the podcast there. Obviously, this is the Women in Leadership Stories, Women Who Make It Happen series. And we're joined by Neha. Obviously, just for the benefit of everyone watching, it'd be good to do a couple of introductions from both sides and then just discuss around topics that we're looking to cover and take it from there. So I suppose starting from my side, so I'm Anna. I work at Interpress. I lead our European branch over here in the Netherlands with a focus on data analytics, product and tech, and then more into the risk space as well. Neha?
Hi, I'm Neha Jha, originally from India, but then living here in Netherlands for about 8 years or so. Career-wise, been in FinTech for about 13 years in product management. Most recently, I was the CPTO at Pile Capital. We were a neo-treasury solution in the DACH region, and we got acquired by Vivid Money, which is another FinTech in Germany itself. Before that, most of the career has been in banking and payments. So head of product for core banking for N26, group product lead for Mambu, which is another core banking engine where I built the entire ecosystems and the integrations product from scratch. And prior to that, a lot of payments companies, so PSPs like Worldline and similar kind of PSPs in India, which were more focused to local payment methods, but India is a very large market in general. So yeah, all in all, FinTech or only FinTech throughout the years.
I feel like FinTech's the rise at the moment. I was looking at statistics yesterday of the amount of FinTechs which have grown and kind of really made a solid mark over the last 6 or 7 years. And I think COVID had quite a big impact on people going into more of the financial technology side of it. I suppose to understand what got you to where you are, it'd be great just to understand a little about your journey from where you started to how you got to where you are today and any of the impacts that would have had.
Sure. I think my entry into FinTech happened when it was not even called FinTech. I mean, it was basically broadly mainly an e-commerce business where payments played a huge part in making the sale happen. At least that was my entry into it. At that time, even the cost, like at least when I'm talking about India, we're talking about like 5%, 6% margin, those kind of payment gateways long back. From there, of course, what you're talking about, the whole evolution of FinTech being into not just becoming like a vertical in itself, but also being in pretty much every industry is just the sheer importance of that particular department's success for any other company. And that's at least what I've seen. Over the years, at least for me personally, this is something that interests me. So it's something which was a very nice mix of almost technical product management. So you get to do a lot of strategy. You get to do a lot of market growth, those kind of initiatives as a product manager. But at the same time, you really need to know your stuff when you get into FinTech. So when I got into the banking side of it, it was almost like the restart switch for me, beginning from Mambu, almost taking a quarter to just read, assimilate and understand what is it, because FinTech can also be very different from the acquiring side and the issuing side. And honestly speaking, it has a lot. Like I have over the years explored payments, I've explored banking, I've explored a bit of investments more recently, but then there's a lot that I haven't done. I've not done insurance, I've not done like, it's huge, and you can just keep on going deep and learning into it. And I don't know if I answered your question, but broadly, overall, to sum it up, it's an extremely interesting field for someone who likes a mix of all these things.
I think that's a really key point though, is FinTech sounds so generalist and just so minimal, whereas actually when you break it down into all of the different product suites, all of the different offerings that they do, it's extremely broad. So it actually brings a lot of different knowledge transformations. And even with us, obviously, FinTech was never, as you mentioned, kind of called the FinTech side of it. And traditionally, we used to only work with your more traditional banks because that was just the way the world worked. But then as that sort of changed and evolutionized, everyone we work with now is extremely digital and more into the what you would call like the FinTech space, where it's like payments, cards, lenders, cryptocurrency businesses. And the way that their products are kind of held at the forefront of everything that they do, the concept of it is actually utilized as to the benefit of how they make profit. And so that comes down and breaks down into the product. We're just seeing that be held a lot more regarded than what I would say some of the bigger, more traditional banks used to historically.
True.
And there's also a lot of more different technicalities to it, because obviously where they are digitalized, you have a lot of different tech stacks, you have a lot of different product usages that they do, product work streams and product creation. So I suppose with everywhere that you have worked for, how has product development and even the deployment side revolutionized over your career, and kind of what would that creation process look like as it's changed?
So I can give you flavors of firstly two sets of products that I worked with. One is, of course, when I worked with extreme enterprise software products like Mambu that get sold to banks itself. That is a very different kind of product management where, there's data, and in general, forging a roadmap is very difficult. Getting FaceTime with the customer is very difficult. You're essentially taking a bet on technology and then trying to frame the entire roadmap from there. Whereas if you work with like a consumer brand, a D2C brand, I would definitely say, even if someone wants to work in enterprise, testing the waters into D2C where you can directly work with the customer. You can go to the customer service portals and just keep on reading reams and reams of feedback what the customers writing on the app store or whatever not. And that gives you a very different kind of product management style, because you're way closer. On the hindsight, the heat could also be way harder. When the customer wants something, they really want it, that kind of thing. So it's really from different sides of things, I would say. Then, of course, from a technology point of view, when you're building enterprise products, or specifically when you're building any kind of a fintech product, technology selection has always been a very critical part of the product management.
Yeah.
Like banks in general are nothing but like a bunch of integrations. There's an ID tool involved, there's a core banking involved, there's a payment institution involved, multiple things involved, right? And essentially, one of the parts, unless you're building a core technology from scratch, and that's another kind of a product management, getting into or knowing the market. Like, for example, if you're going into clearing of payments, you're a bank, you're a neobank, you want to move money from A point to B, you need to know what are the vendors in the market, what is the cost pricing, what's the operations involved, how does the AML fraud monitoring work, etc., etc. And broadly, that is exactly what I said. That's what fintech gets you. It's, in my opinion, I would say still less generic, or even if it's generic, it's product decisions, or for the intuition to kick in, a lot of reading and a lot of finesse is required. And that part, I think, over the years, I've seen technologies, of course, evolve. I would say pretty much everyone now who's on the technology space is doing pretty good on the basics, from the developer experience point of view, from just the sheer tech point of view, the entire landscape is very competitive just from the sheer cost point of view.
Yeah.
AI is also getting into from an enterprise point of view. But only one thing that I still think there's a long way to go is getting in and out of technologies is not that easy. Like once you lock in, and that's why it's such a heavy thing. Once you lock in the technology, you're in it for a while, and then exiting it in a running operations is an art in banking in general to do.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like that feels like where the crossroads sort of hits of trying to take one out while it's still going and where that process is going. And I think everyone's in this sort of pit at the moment where it's an extremely competitive market due to the sheer amount of fintechs out there and people coming into the same market now. But also looking at it from a cost efficiency perspective, how do you remain competitive whilst remaining cost efficient? And you mentioned there, obviously, with every different product that you look at, whether you have the customer who's fighting to get what they want and the client who's needing to get profitability and move in a different route, how would you change your sort of product management process against all of those different areas?
See, I'll tell you what I'd keep constant and definitely see if the basics are nailed down.
Yeah.
Whatever is the context, whether it's the B2B context or the B2C context, and the B2B is definitely way harder in my opinion, I would again and again focus on the solution and the value that the customer is facing, because ultimately, no matter which amount of marketing and what amount of product messaging, everything comes later on, the product fails if there's no value. So
Yeah.
I would say point number one, go back again and again and then say, okay, why would someone pay money to you? Because A, B, C is the value, and that has to be really granular, and that has to be really on point for most products. And
Yeah.
in my opinion, both, when products have worked or not worked, that has been the numero uno reason for it. Yeah, both of it, because you try, like, over the years, you try like multiple things, and sometimes you also see things not work. And
Yeah.
and despite, I would say, all the data that is available in the world, despite all the insights, if you're not able to crack that value, never comes through. So that to me is one. Second, there has to be some or the other form of longevity to the product. Like, it could not be a response to a spike or a wave of a trend. I mean, that can build a feature, that cannot build a company, in my opinion. Right? So,
well, it's just too turbulent. If you're kind of if you look at all of the trends that have happened over the last 2 years, there's been so many spikes at so many different points that have lasted 2 months, and then they go on to the next sort of phase. If you're consistently trying to build a product based on a spike of interest, you're never going to build something sustainable to be able to make it scalable against the business, because you're just chasing your tail again and again, which also brings probably cost problems as well if you're continuously looking at the development of it. But also, what really is the business plan? Is it, you can't really dedicate a business to a particular area to specialize in a particular subject if you're continuously chasing different spikes of interest. I suppose if you look at it from a futuristic perspective, that would make a lot more sense, because you can have it as like an additional side of it as well.
True. And that's what I meant by, like, it has to have like that, it has to be part of like that broader strategy of a company.
Yeah.
In isolation. And it also definitely needs to be that whole, I keep on saying, longevity, if you really think company rather than just your department. And third, I would say is, picking up from what you mentioned, it has to nail the ops part of it in FinTech.
Yes.
So when and ops definitely boils down to, your base pricing, your unit economics of running any kind of a product, overall efficiency. So it could be like a very fancy product, but it could be extremely difficult to maintain. It could be extremely difficult to take to the market. And that's the third part that I would say. If it's the B2C side, the operations side, investing into chatbots, support, anything that has to do with making a lean, mean machine so that it could be maintained on a day-to-day basis, or whether it's on the B2B side for anything that has to make it more self-service, whether it's a developer portal, sandbox environment, anything and everything. And that's what is the make or break, in my opinion. Like currently.
And I suppose as well, just to understand it, because that's quite an interesting topic, is where there is so much change and so like many new processes, interests coming from the FinTech space, how do you keep ahead of that to make a product agile and adaptable to those certain spikes? Obviously, you look at the longevity side of it, but how would you kind of factor in all of the impacts of like economic change?
See, in my opinion, like most of these things of how do you keep intact with it is mostly coming from product managers who have a very strong product, what is usually called as a product sense or a product intuition. And that never comes, again, on just going and following one thing today. You have to be embedded deep into the industry. You almost have to be a fly on the wall, whether it's portals like LinkedIn, Twitter, etc., and then just read what an analyst is saying, read what a senior product leader from Stripe is saying about the market, read what the market is saying, read what the VCs are saying in general. And overall, then that makes you, at least that has helped me make a cocktail of my own opinion standpoint around it. Again, I would say I may not get it right all the time. I may not get it wrong all the time, but it's good to have a very strong point of view around the product, and also helps you take a very educated decision about it. If you're
Yeah.
catching a theme around it, if you're genuinely interested in fintech, despite the highs and lows, despite the fact that it's in vogue or not currently, you're essentially just noticing the products, the markets, the new businesses coming. Like right now, I see a lot of open source solutions coming and amazing ones.
Yes.
Right? So broadly, just notice, read, write, absorb. That's it.
I think it's just that saying is no matter what level you get to, you need to make sure you keep the blinkers off. So then you're aware of like your surroundings, you're consistently reading and updating yourself rather than coming into a sense of complacency. It's keeping up to date with market trends and market changes, which is all the time in fintech, to be able to keep ahead and then, as I say, in return, remain competitive. But I suppose from where you mentioned like the B2C and B2B side of it, and where you've worked across both of them, what would you say were kind of what was the biggest change for you that you had to adapt to when moving to those two markets?
I'd say speed of development is very different. So in B2B side of it, we're talking about 3-year roadmaps, 2-year roadmaps, right? So you're talking about 3-year roadmaps, and the major battle is the roadmaps are very tight. You may either make a person or a sales guy, to be very specific, very happy or very pissed. But these are the kind of difficult decisions that you need to make. But then there are long-term roadmaps, there's stability, and then a lot of it is on execution overall.
Yes.
On the B2C side of things, again, it depends on what kind of a growth trajectory is the company in. It could go from anywhere to anywhere. Like I have at least tried to seal a 3 months roadmap, and then suddenly something is broken in some other department and everything is interconnected, and off goes everything. And you have to be extremely on the toes to fix regulatory issues, anything operational, etc. So broadly, I would say still there is an importance of, having that stable roadmap, etc. But the thinking on the feet, because the consumer, overall, the response to consumer is very like in your face. Like the App Store rating is going down from 4 to 3 in front of your eyes, and then you have to do something to save it. That I would say. So the creativity is way more in B2C, I would still say so. Again, like I said, there are different ways of looking at it. In my opinion, I did B2B first and then went to B2C. I would have almost wished myself to go the other way around, because then you know a lot what to make in an enterprise software, and you've touched the consumer much more closer in 1 or 2 lives of yours.
And I suppose having both of them put together, as you say, like the creativity behind it and necessity to kind of stay on the forefront is extremely focused on kind of where they need to be at the moment, which is always really, really interesting. And if you focus on kind of both of those different ends, you get a sense of understanding business and the architecture and the products that go against businesses and the enterprises, which are needed. And then also from the consumer side, consumers are interchangeable, and you could have people who are completely different ethnicities, backgrounds, ages, and it's seeing what product is going to be almost, it's a one size fits all, but it's not, because it needs to be adaptable and change. And I think that's where you mentioned the creativity side of it probably would have come in. So I suppose by working with those two companies, with all of the different products that you have worked on, what would you say would be like the most impactful, the one where you've really kind of had to get creative to find a solution to put it to market?
I mean, in terms of product, like I said, when I joined Mambu, it was a very built from scratch. So you're given a concept, and that to me is one of the most difficult form of building a product, because you're given a concept and then you literally have to figure out pieces of it. And this was like an integrations product, almost like a marketplace that needs to be sold to banks across geographies. And that had multiple aspects of it. That has the commercial aspect of it, that had competitors plus vendors who could work with you, who could not work with you, those kind of aspects. That had a lot of, in my opinion, it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot for, the number of factors that go into taking decisions so that the product could stand long. Just from a sheer impact perspective, it was a short stint, the most recent one, but then I took the product from literally friends and family to multiple paying customers. And getting paying customers for an early stage product, when you don't have marketing, when you don't have, or you have marketing, but it's very guerrilla style, so to speak.
Yeah.
It is extremely tough, because it is also tough, but it's also extremely rewarding, because even as a senior person, again, like I said, I'm a huge fan of doing hands-on work throughout your career. So even if you're leading strategy, all of it, always answer the intercom chat, always write that linear or a Jira ticket that is needed for a developer to work, always do that. But at the same time, the sheer amount of, especially when you're figuring out things from thin air, the sheer amount of negative, I wouldn't even say negative feedback, but cancellation of your hypothesis that happens in a customer call is an absolute learning point. Like, you might end up saying that, hey, this will, be the next big thing in a business, but you might go to like a German business who's very busy doing multi-country operations and they don't value it at all. So I would say those two things. One was about scale. It was mainly about like replicating a product into multiple countries, operationally stabilizing it, teaches you a lot. But second was just about literally thin air, where neither the product nor the internal engine is well oiled, and you have to do everything in one go. That's it, broadly, those two experiences of mine.
Yeah, and I suppose kind of picking up on two main points there, which I put on, I suppose it'd be good to understand from your perspective, obviously with the thin air side of it and really constructing a product from friends and family, how you design a product which then can generate kind of payable customers. Like, how do you line a product up to be unique enough to kind of move it into that? And then also, just you mentioned there as well that it's really important to be hands-on. And I think over the course of the last decade, I would say, there used to be quite a segregation between business and execution, and people would be really good at strategy and people would be really good at hands-on. But where it's gone more fintech side of it, people are really looking at bridging the gap between business and executionists and remaining a hands-on, even up to kind of C-suite level, to be able to get really stuck into the detail and technicalities of the product should it need, which it mainly does. So I suppose, as remaining hands-on, that would be my second question, but has remaining hands-on been something that you've wanted to do, or has it just been a necessity for the role? Has there been a time where they've kind of split the two as well?
It's both, but see, different people come from different schools of thought in terms of product leadership. I come from, and there was a huge debate of the whole founder mode going on in LinkedIn and Twitter very recently.
Yeah,
I do subscribe to that thought. So at least for me, for growing up, like over the span of the years, and I've also never taken leadership, or I haven't gotten leadership positions just as a, I don't know how to say, helicopter landing. I've grown over the years from like senior, junior, and overall group, etc. I have learned the most from my immediate managers, bosses, who would still take out time to code, like at a C-level where they have been, C-level executives for a while now. And it's a very different, and I've seen both kind of managers, one which is on very generic side, one which is on very specific side. Just the sheer troubleshooting and the coaching that you can do to someone who's coming up in your career, because you've either seen it or you have a fair understanding of what is going on underneath, is just amazing. So I would say, for me, it was both. It was the kind of products that I'm building. Just in general, if you don't know the details, you're rather quiet most of the time in a customer call. So you would rather have all the details so that you can have that effective discussion in a customer call. And secondly, that's also been always my style of leading a product, where in general, it has made me lead the senior product managers and the, overall the people who've been reporting or in my direct line. I coach by understanding the work and then troubleshooting what they're missing. That's one aspect of it, but it really helps.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, nothing against the other side, but I find it very difficult to just generally say that, uh, do stakeholder management or
Yeah.
do feature management. You have to have flavors and details around it. Uh, but yeah, in my opinion, the best of the creamiest layer know their details.
Yeah. I think it
And
just
that's
helps you as
essential.
well with like credibility towards a team, because if you have all these technical people in like small teams or startup areas coming with questions or needing support, being able to actually get into the detail with them, as you quite rightly referenced, really helps you be able to coach, train, manage. They all learn and kind of look up to you to actually be able to see how you got to where you are, how you would do things from all of your past knowledge, which they can then kind of take on board and learn from as well. So I see it as a benefit kind of being hands-on, because then you're into the detail, but you're also able to kind of continue that mentoring and coaching ability of it as well. And I suppose just to touch on the first question that I asked, because I did double up there, it's more around the when you built a product and were able to take it to paying customers, kind of what made it unique enough and the thought process in order to line it up well for deployment.
So in my opinion, in early stage product, getting those one or two critical use cases really nail on, and that is where the money is coming for. Because if you're really like a blank state, and even if you're asking for 20 euros of SaaS fees for subscription, SaaS is a very crowded space, right? Like everyone is paying some of the other subscription. The value should really be just, in your face.
Yeah.
And really be felt, saying, okay, you can't go behind the fluff, any kind of a fluffy feature, any kind of a, I don't know, chatbot, a report, this or that doesn't work. Early stages, at least the way we were able to nail down is look at one gap into the market, really talk to the customers again and again. It's almost a very exhaustive process where you essentially go and, like the last product I built, a lot of the products were very CFO focused. And again, I have to say, the industry, if you ask, like usually everyone says getting customer feedback is very difficult. But I have myself slid into LinkedIn DMs of people whom I have no idea of, very senior people leading, finance departments, very large companies, would also mostly never be my customer because I'm at such an early stage of my product. But these guys have been way more generous in just sitting on a 1 hour call and telling me what works, what doesn't, where they don't need a solution at all because the thing is really working, where they really need a solution, and then getting a pattern out of it and figuring out those one or two use cases which I really bang on. And then that's one. And second, having a customer journey that is super tight. And that is why onboarding is such a big topic in FinTech in general, right? So whichever kind of a solution do you give, whether you give a solution to business banking or you give a solution to retail banking, behind that solution, the journey to get to that solution and cutting it down to 10 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, just being absolute granular about it, saying the customer gives you the least amount of information so that the solution and the value is met. That is, according to me, what nails it. So one or two very strong use cases, very strong customer journey, and very strong ops behind it, so that there's faith in this company in general. Because you also have to let go a lot of other things. It's not a mature company. Things also do not work.
I think it's a really good point of when you try to make something and take it to market, some people keep it so broad so they can kind of look at different focus points for loads of different things. Whereas if you specify it to a particular need and have all of the details from the kind of customer interactions that you've had, the questions that you've asked, it makes it a lot more, I would say it probably has an easier landing. Because if you go too broad, that's when I assume you'd probably get the fluffiness side of it. Whereas if you have it very specific, you can really dedicate to your ops, your user creation, and also your customer journey to really support across the aspect that you're trying to get through.
True. And that's also like, it's easier always. The business model is easy to explain. The ops is easier to explain. If you take it to someone who's in like a VC side of things, it's easier to explain. And again, I'm not saying this kind of maturity has come to me overnight. this kind of maturity has come by trying a lot of broad things and then saying, okay, the stronger your conviction is, the more you talk to the customer, etc., it naturally becomes more narrow and focused from a solution perspective. So broadly, yes, that's been my learning, at least. So that's worked for me. And again, most products, if you see, whether you see a super app, whether you see a large enterprise software that has a lot of use cases, and if you go to, my favorite thing to do sometimes is just go to review websites and just read what random people are saying about it. There's always a pattern.
It's like continuous learning, really, isn't it, at the same time?
It's always the case. And like I said, there's always a pattern. Like most of the customer will be like, one or two things really work very well for this software. The rest, I don't like it, but I let it go.
Yeah.
And that's what you crack. Like one or two things really work well. But yeah, that's at least been my learning around it.
Well, that's really interesting. I suppose from having worked across a few different areas and been involved in a lot of fintech-led and kind of technology-led organizations, obviously we spoke about B2B and B2C, but if you take the companies as a general, what was the sort of biggest change you had to do in terms of, I suppose, methodology and mentality as you've kind of passed through these companies?
I think from a development side, one of the biggest things that I've done in both sides across is most of the time when a product team builds strategy, it's very outward facing. So you show that strategy to what you call as standard stakeholders.
Yeah.
Show it to business side, you show it to sales side, etc. I also believe a lot in doing that strategy internally. So like at least in most of the teams that I've had, whichever stage they are, we used to do a lot of internal meetings of doing strategy presentations way before the roadmap has even started cooking to developers.
Yeah.
Right. And that to me, in my opinion, has been at least for me, the most fruitful and the predictable way of building a product, especially when it has too many moving pieces. When the developer actually starts, or the development team broadly, and one or two principal engineers and senior engineers always shine out more than the other, start going super deep into the business aspect of it rather than the technology side of it. And usually then, if that kind of a mix is met, everything cannot be written in a paper, everything cannot be written in a Jira ticket. The devs automatically take care of a lot of complications, which you would not even have seen, slightly going into the technical side, the ops side of things, many of these kind of aspects. If you have a good engineering partner and you take that effort of constantly explaining, what would happen if this product doesn't respond to scale? What would happen if this product isn't fast enough, or those kind of aspects? Ultimately, it's the developer who's doing the heavy lifting. And hence the memes in the world that there are 15 people and then there's just one dev fixing, a problem statement. That, according to me, has helped a lot. Like, you constantly keep talking to your senior engineers, your principal engineers, your tech lead, as to where do you want to go. And they constantly then keep on trickling it down underneath so that they prepare a team in general for that. Yeah, I'd say that's mainly about it.
Oh, amazing. And I suppose as well, just kind of looking at your kind of individual challenges and successes over the course of your career, what would you say was the biggest challenge where you've kind of really had to push to kind of keep it going forwards?
I think for me, in general, one of the most challenging parts is, especially during COVID time when FinTech was like what you mentioned, crazy.
Yeah.
You can, of course, like we've always worked in very fast-paced startups, all of it. But then there's a limit to fast-paced. And
yes,
that's, if you ask me, most challenging. It has been just from a personal point of view, when you feel that, you can't really catch up, and then when you're leading a team, all what you hear is we can't catch up to. But then when you're going into those senior management meetings and looking at it from a company point of view, it is all we want to do is catch up.
Yeah,
And we want
I
to
think
double
it's
down
that thing
on
of
catch up.
pace, isn't it? And I think they're so fast paced, some of them. It's hard to
Yes.
take a breath sometimes.
Yes, and that's why I'd say if you're into this hyper competitive market, it's very difficult to have your own point of view
Mm-hmm.
saying, hey, this is how we're going to do it. Very few companies, in my opinion, nail it. So, to have that, what you said, blinders and say, okay, if everyone is making X, whatever that X be, right now, AI, at one point of time, crypto, anything, does it make sense to us? And are we going behind it? And is it again tied intrinsically to our business model, etc.? Because just the whole noise and the sheer amount of like in product management, and you'll hear a lot of these LinkedIn posts that says no, say no very beautifully. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Like ultimately you're saying no to a human being who's your colleague, who's going to meet you in an office space, etc., etc. It's not that easy.
No.
Yeah.
And I
So
think it's like the integration of teams as well, because everything like product and sales, sometimes the interlink between there, or like product and ops, if someone's saying no to someone, they see it as like a hindrance rather than a benefit. And I think it's taken quite a lot to kind of get the industry to where it is now, to see that there's solutions behind it. It's just got to go different ways.
True. Like I said, if again the whole everything everywhere all at once kind of a phenomena where everyone is trying to do everything, that phase, especially if the company is at that phase, or at least the product organization is at that phase, because ultimately you're representing a part of a larger piece of the puzzle, gets very, very difficult in general. And that's why you'd see a lot of like took a 6 months break, went to Latin America kind of things, because it's very overwhelming for people.
Yeah, and I suppose that ties quite nicely into, and this is the one everyone always finds hard about, which baffles me, but what was the like biggest success of your career?
Like I said, to me, I mentioned, right, like one is when I built these from the scratch products.
Yeah.
Most recently built something like literally very early on. Overall, the biggest success to me is when a concept can be almost run into production and then you see a real use case come live, because it's rather easier said than done, honestly. Like the success rate of that, because of, again, I would say, because for a product to go well, like all the products that you see, whether it's in the B2B space or B2C space, have really nailed it. The only single pattern that you see is that the marketing has worked for that product, the operations has worked for the product, the tech has worked for the product. And that is why product management was such a difficult thing to do, right? Because ultimately you're the one who's tying over everything, right from the website messaging has worked for the product. And that has been very fruitful. Like it's genuinely difficult for everything to come together and nail it. And 1 or 2 times when it really comes together, it's worth it, like all of it. That I would say.
And I think it's a benefit for anybody, and also a massive success story if you see something through from start to finish and then see it in fruition, get in the case studies, particularly if it's something that you've built from scratch yourself. Like the amount of reward that must be to see it kind of deploy into the market and actually get buying customers is something which I can only imagine is very, very nice. And I suppose where you have been, and kind of starting to round this off a little bit, where you've been involved in so many different areas, you've done permanent, you've done freelance, you've been involved in so many different products, probably a lot of technical side of changes through the technologies that they use. If you could have given, or the now you could have spoken to the you starting your career, what advice would you have given yourself?
I'd say 1 or 2. One is, at least when I started off in Netherlands, and it was a mixture of multiple factors. I had come, I always needed a job with a visa attached to it, therefore job security, etc. you would always go for a set number of companies, but I would always say two things, at least for me. Select a good boss, like always get that high intuition that if you work with him or her, he or she will pull you.
Yeah.
Pull you up by again teaching you hands-on stuff, discussing things with you, etc. That doesn't mean you'll always agree with your boss, etc. But then and I've been very thankful for getting one or two of them. It needs an extremely secure and mature person, specifically in a complicated field like product in fintech, to do that. So that's one. Secondly, select a company, irrespective of the size, irrespective of even I would say, and like now I would say more job security, but in general, where you really agree with the core problem that it solves, because it's difficult to like get up day in and day out and go out into the market, do it.
Mm-hmm.
And thirdly, select a company that helps you do a lot of like on-job work.
Yeah.
Where some companies, they say they're not siloed. Some companies, it's really siloed in terms of structures. To an extent that you can't give an opinion to marketing because that's marketing's job, or you can't give an opinion to technical writing because that's writing's job, etc. Get that hang of the culture of a company while interviewing, or in general while getting into it, because again, like I said, it has to be that whole free flow. And if I have to sum it up, the companies that I have really both learned a lot, grown a lot, got the most amount of promotions, but at the same time enjoyed working the most, did have the HR angle sorted the most.
I think it's a really big statement. People join people. They don't necessarily join the companies, but like some companies, the bigger you go, the more siloed it is. And I think it's really important to kind of keep in touch with all of the different areas and keep the role broad to be able to understand marketing, the technical concept, because ultimately that is still part of your role and part of your bread and butter. But yeah, people buy into people, which is why when good bosses leave, you quite often see some of the team leave with them.
Yeah. And like I said, right, you often see bosses literally almost people follow people.
Yeah.
Right? And over the years, even I have to look an eye of, who's doing work where, for that matter, because that becomes an interesting thing. But in general, that's what I have realized. The companies that have invested in people the most, the companies that have, I'll just give you a small example and maybe then wrap this topic out. In product management itself, not everyone has to go the ladder of senior group, product director, etc. Some of the good companies that I've worked with really understand the value of individual contributors, senior individual contributors, and create this whole senior individual contributor path where you would be a staff PM, a product lead, or even just an analyst, whatever be the tag name, but you're equally valued, you're equally taking into consideration in all the important meetings, you're equally compensated for that matter. And that's what I'm talking about, where a specialist can coexist with like a people manager, worker, that kind of a model. And it takes a lot of human resource modeling and maturity, because these are things that you can't influence in silos.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to realize is there's not this generic path that everyone has to follow. You can create your own path and you can do what interests you and still equally be as valued and as progressed as people who do go down the managerial route too, which I think some people always, they feel like they're never going to get to where they want to be unless they go into the managerial side, which is completely changed from what it was now. There's kind of a few different avenues that people can go down to keep themselves interested, but also like relevant.
I mean, you see it mostly, at least what I've seen it, mostly with these startups who now almost come into that whole unicorn places, where the early stage employees of these startups who've really helped build it from scratch, they've done it. But some of them don't like the hassle of managing people, managing reports.
Some people just don't enjoy it.
Exactly. And to each one on its own, right? Like every kind of a work is valued. And that I think is something which is very important. And the counter of it is also true. Sometimes when there's no progression ladder left, ultimately you make a non-manager into a manager. Right? And that really keeps the entire house of cards falling, where you can see that this person's not interested in because it's a lot. Like you have to listen to someone's complaints, etc.
You have to be a sounding board.
Yeah, exactly. You have to take, I would say as a manager, you have to take interest into birthdays, family, everything.
Everything.
Exactly. Some people are just not in it, and so be it. The company should be able to accommodate. And I also feel sometimes you have to give value to career paths where different people are at different parts of their life, where even if they're managers, they can come down to some saner, quieter, more focused work model. So broadly, that would be my thing. Like really focus on a good boss, really focus on a good problem statement, and really try and look for all the signs possible that this is a good company that you're joining.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to kind of end on, is really focus on yourself and also the development and your interest, because it's only with what you're interested in you're going to be able to kind of get to where that you want to be. And there's clearly quite a lot of routes to go down in fintech. There's a lot of products out there, so there's a lot of learning to be done at the same time. So I do want to say thank you so much for joining. It was so interesting finding out your different thought processes on attached methodologies, how you get products to market and make payable customers interested in it, the different sort of technologies and capabilities, and then just some of your recommendations. It was really intriguing to hear about all of that. So again, thank you so much for joining.
Super. Thanks a lot.